Hi there berries, welcome to my Zyra Support guide for Season 12. If you don't know who I am, my name is Bizzleberry and I make a lot of support guide content for League of Legends. On this YouTube channel you can find other champion guides and support tier lists and support gameplay, and also I'm working on a support coaching website, so if you're interested in me personally coaching you, then the link will be underneath the video, so check that out. So this time, as you know, we're doing Zyra, and there are a couple of rune builds that we can do here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the rune builds, and then we're going to go into practice tool and start talking about the abilities and potential items and combinations that you need to be aware of when you're playing Zyra. So the runes right in front of you are the bog standard runes that I would advise everyone to try when they first play Zyra. These are the runes that I actually use anyway, even though I have a lot of experience playing Zyra. These are the runes that I use anyway in my ranked games. When I use them in the diamond / master games, these are the runes I use. So you can feel free to use these in every single game. So it's the Arcane Comet build, and we are getting the Mana Flow Band just for mana regeneration, and Transcendence for cooldown reduction, and then the Scorch. So the Scorch helps interact with Arcane Comet. So if there is a Scorch debuff on the enemy, it can proc Arcane Comet. So you can get some little bit of extra potential damage output there with the interaction with those two runes. Inspiration secondaries to once again give us a little bit more mana regeneration and a bit more health for sustain in that laning phase. And Cosmic Insight is just a nice little summoner haste generally, and also the item haste can also affect your trinkets, so more wards and oracle clearing. On the stat runes you can go ability haste or adaptive force. For the first rune, then it's adaptive force, and then it's armor or magic resistance depending on what you're up against. So you can feel free to copy and paste these to every single Zyra game you want to do. Because I know there are going to be some Zyra people that have played Zyra before and they like the other kind of rune build. And you've got two options in domination. The only thing I would recommend personally changing here is either taking the Dark Harvest for Electrocute. So Electrocute is great if you feel like you can land basically your roots. So that's your E ability if you're familiar with that. That will allow you to proc Electrocute a good amount. You're generally using that against melee champions like Leona, Nautilus, if you really want to go down into this route. Otherwise, Dark Harvest, if you just want that kind of play that mini game, you can do. It's good against squishy team compositions. I wouldn't recommend it against a tanky team composition. But you can copy these runes if you want to go into that domination tree. But for the purposes of this guide, we will not be talking about the domination tree. We are going to be talking about the Arcane Comet. So we're going to go jump into a practice tool, and we'll start talking about the abilities once we jump in. Summoners on Zyra, it is a Ignite Flash. You're playing Zyra generally to get ahead in the laning phase, and then you can escalate that into potentially carrying a team via damage and sustain, and she has a decent amount of crowd control as well, so she's quite all-rounded, but the downside is that she is quite squishy. So while we're waiting for the game to load in, if you're wondering what champions to play Zyra with, you generally want to play Zyra with poking AD carries. So champions like Ezreal and Jhin and Caitlyn are perfect to basically overwhelm your opponent with harassing abilities. So what I'm going to do here is going to give myself some abilities, and then we are going to give myself mana, cooldown reduction, stop the minions from spawning, and then we're going to put a couple of target dummies down. Okay, that's the setup complete. So Zyra's passive, we'll see it pop off shortly. It basically spawns seeds around her in this gigantic circle. Early on, you'll be using these with your abilities to spawn plants, which we'll talk about briefly in a minute. But the gist of it is that you're basically getting free seed spawn locations, essentially. Next is her Q. So Q is basically a line attack. So you see the bright thick bar in the middle. the bright rectangle in the center, that is the damage. The bigger, greater rectangle indicates that if there's any seeds in the location of that rectangle, a plant will spawn. You'll also find this is on the E ability as well. There are 2 bars similar to that. So Zyra, this is mainly Zyra's main spammable ability. This is her main kind of consistent DPS source when poking in lane, especially early on. It's really good for wave clearing, so clearing out minion waves. Also, a note here, I mentioned Jhin works really well with Zyra. Jhin and Misfortune are really, really good with Zyra, because once you get 3 points in your queue, what you want to do is on the back line of those caster minions, you want to poke them down with a Q. And that puts down those minions to around about 50%, 40% HP. Now, this requires a little bit of knowledge of what Jhin and Misfortune do. So both of their Q abilities work really well with this. So Jin's Q is a bouncing grenade that bounces 4 times. And that does more damage every time it kills a target. So Jin's Q would then kill those 3 caster minions at the back. And then the 4th grenade, if it bounces onto an enemy champion, it's going to do a lot of damage. Now Misfortune's Q is quite similar as well, is that it's it does a projectile out to a target and then shoots another projectile off that target. If the first target dies, so in this case if Misfortune Qs a caster minion and that minion dies, the projectile that comes back off of that minion is a guaranteed crit. So setting up those minions for caster minions for Jhin and Misfortune specifically is really, really nice. Also, you can use it to push in the lane if you're wanting to do a reset, essentially. Zyra's W is her seed plant, like her additional seeds. So you can spawn those down when you basically press W. There's nothing really else to talk about this ability. It's one of the ones that it's the maxing. We're going to be maxing W last, essentially, because this is all this does is spawns us some seeds. Now we have our E, which is our root ability and our main crowd control source. So as before on the Q projectile, you see how this middle line here is brighter and then there's a giant rectangle around it. It's the same again, so the middle portion is the root and the box on the outside spawns the plants. Bear in mind that inside the middle of the projectile as well, you also will be spawning plants. So the 2 main differences between Q and E in terms of plants is that they will always do the same amount of damage. Okay, so there's a big misconception is that if you put more points in your Q, the range plants that spawn from that will do more damage. Because you put more points in Q, that is totally not the case. It's the same with the E as well. So the projectiles that spawn, so the plants that spawn from your Q ability are ranged, and the one that spawns from your E are melee. So the one on the right is melee, and if that auto hits a target, it does slow them, and you can have 2 plants slowing the same target, and that will be 50% slow. Each plant will slow them by 25%. Nope, I'm wrong. 30% each. It's a 60% slow in total. But you get the point. So these plants do the same amount of damage each. The only way you can scale up the damage on your plants is via levels. So champion levels, that is. And ability power. You can also enhance your plant's damage by taking ability effect things such as Liandry's and Demonic Embrace. Those will affect the plants and increase the plant's DPS, essentially, the damage output. So when you're in a fight, you're going to be deciding a lot whether to do Q plant harassment or E plant slow, extra crowd control and locking down a target. So generally, kind of maybe you've already got that from what I said, is that when you're harassing in lane or harassing a target, you're mainly going to be using these Q poke plants. If you're looking to lock down a target or get away from a jungler, you're generally doing these E plants to slow them down, to make sure they can't get away, make it harder for the enemy to get to you. Now finally, Zyra's ultimate is basically a giant trampoline. If you use it on these enemy target dummies here, after a short delay, they'll get knocked up. Now if you look carefully at the animation of the Zyra ulti, there's a growth that happens at the center and then it expands outwards. Now this ability basically does damage near instantly, but there is a short delay to that happening. It does depend on where the target that you're ulting is in the growth. So if you look at this, we're going to do this minion right in front of us. We're going to use the growth on the center, and it should get damaged near instantly. Whereas the one on the outside at edge, it will take about 0.5 seconds to get to. So you can see there's that short delay. So ideally you're hitting the target that you want to hit in near the center, if possible. Now Zyra has another interaction with her ultimate with her plants. So if we put down a ranged plant and a melee plant, or two melee plants, the ultimate basically enrages your plants. So they gain 50% bonus HP, and they also deal 50% more damage. Also, if you pay attention to the white bar depleting from the top, if you actually ult before it depletes, it resets the duration of the plants, so they last for a longer period of time. That's particularly useful if you're needing to kill Baron relatively quickly and you're not afraid to use your ult on it, because that way you can have, say, a couple of plants already on Baron. So they're firing away. Imagine these plants are firing away onto a Baron buff. And you just put down a new plant, and then you basically reset the duration of the other plants. I'll try and show that a bit better here. So, to show that, got some plants here that are about to deplete. Your W's come off cooldown, or some seeds spawn from your passive. And that way, you can have 3 plants up for a longer period of time. Because your ultimate does a knock-up effect, it works really nicely with champions like Yasuo. He can ult off of these because they're knocked up. So as you can see, Zyra's got slows, she's got roots, she's got an AoE knock-up, and she's got poking and harassing tools in her kit. When you're playing the laning phase, if you're doing the Arcane Comet build, generally you're maxing your Q first, and then your E, and then your W. Now, the main reason why we're maxing our Q first is because it does a little bit more raw damage per point in Q, but also reduces the cooldown of your Q. So you're able to spam more often in order to harass your opponent. If you don't like putting 5 points in Q, you can kind of do an alternative. So you could do 3 points in Q and then max your E. Now when you max your E, you're actually getting more root duration. So it goes from 1 to 2 seconds with 5 points. It's not a huge amount early on with early points, but 2 seconds does become noticeable later on down the line. Electrocute maxing early is particularly good against hard engaged champions, and that's why people generally lean more towards the electrocute build when they're maxing their E, because they are basically essentially saying, I will land my E on this target no matter what, so then it will allow me to proc my electrocute off. And while we're talking about electrocute can proc per instance of plant. So to proc electrocute, you need 3 separate instances of damage. So this could be an ability, an auto attack, and in this case it can be a plant attack. So if you were to auto hit and then have 2 plants up on a target, that would proc electrocute essentially. So now we're going to be talking about some little advanced combinations that you're going to be doing and some tips for the laning phase when you're playing Zyra. So some tips would be are you finding yourself like doing these combinations too slowly? Because most Zyra players will do a Q. Most Zyra players, sorry, will do W first and then Q. So they put down the seed and then Q. What if I told you that was wrong? It's one of the biggest mistakes new Zyra players make when playing her. You can actually do the W in your spell animation. So for example, if I do Q then W, it spawns it much faster. Also, there's an added benefit to doing this as well. So when you're doing your root, for example, if you were to put down the seed already and then do the E, the target has time to potentially maneuver around the seed spawn location. However, if we do EW, it comes out instantly, so they're not expecting where the seed location is. And there's also another benefit to this. So if a jungler's coming down and your E is going to miss the target. So say, for example, on this training dummy, imagine it's coming at me. Very scary jungler. He's fed. We need to get away. But we missed our E. Say they dash to the side. As long as we're doing it in the rectangle still, spawning our plants, so then we do EW in that direction, we can at least get the slowing plants to do their thing to help disengage essentially from that. So let me get rid of these plants here. It's quite annoying Zyra's passive for this practice. So I missed my E. But we managed to get those slowing plants in range, essentially. So that's a great way to try and help further get away from and engage, essentially. Or you can use those to relocate. Say if you miss your E when engaging on a target, you can then get that W seed closer on top of the target, so that at least the plant is bashing away at them. There's also some mechanics here in terms of plants, in terms of targeting. So if you were just to fire out a QW like this, it will just attack the nearest target. So it'd be champions or melee minions. However, if your ability lands on an enemy champion, those plants will focus fire on that target until it dies or until the target moves out of range. Not only can you force your plants to attack a target based on the ability that you land on, if you auto attack the target, your plants will focus that target. So because Zyra's auto attack range is super long, you should be using your auto attacks to help dictate where your plants are going to be firing. Not a lot of people know about that one, so make sure you use that one in laning phase as well. Also, your plants, as you can imagine, block skill shots. So if there's a blitzcrank hook coming at you, if you're quick enough, or to anticipate it at least anyway, you can use your plants to hide behind them in order to block those skill shots. Do bear in mind that skill shots from most champions, like for example a mystic shot, will kill the plant. The plants generally can take 2 auto hits from a champion or from epic monsters like the dragon and the baron, but abilities they can only take 1 hit. Also melee hits, they can only take 1 hit, so this is ranged auto attacks from champions. Melee auto attacks from champions can 1 hit plants. Just the way it is, I'm afraid. Also, there are a couple of unique interactions that you can do with Zyra plants. So you can, if you're up against a Shaco and you know there's a box and a brush, for example, you can spawn your plant on top of that box. That will make the box come out with stealth and then eventually despawn, but for some reason Shaco boxes one-shot plants, so it will spawn instantly your plant, but it will die instantly as well. But you got the benefit of knowing You can then attack the Shaco box. You can, it will despawn much quicker than it otherwise would. But on top of this, on other traps, so for example, Teemo mushrooms, you can do that as well in order to deactivate Teemo mushrooms or Jin traps or anything else like that. The Zyra W is also really good for scouting, so the range on this is pretty high, much safer than if it were to ward. So if I actually go back to my fountain here and we pick up a ward, you can see on that brighter circle, that's the ward range, okay? But with Zyra W, the range on that is much further. So it's much safer to face check a brush with Zyra W. And if you wanted to extend the range, so you get a brief amount of vision when you put that seed down, but then you won't be able to see in that brush anymore. But you can put a plant in there and that will extend the vision range. So you can essentially, from where I am right now, I can see about 3-4 flash distances away pretty safely. So I know I'll be able to know if there's an enemy champion sitting in that brush over there. And we can put an enemy target dummy there just to show that off. So if I put my W down, you still won't see that target dummy. But if I put the plant down, you can see how huge range that is in terms of spotting out where an enemy could be. And using W to face check along the route or where you're going is a really good idea and a good habit to get into. Any other tips that I want to provide on the plants? There isn't much else to add, but I will say again, I will reiterate to make sure you learn that combination of ability then W. So E, W, Q, W. Super important that you do that. Speeds up the whole animation and allows you to relocate those plants. But just to reiterate again on the spell order, I personally go Q max, E max, W max, then you're done. Okay, so Q, E, W. And next we're going to be talking about items, and I'm going to be talking about some really user-friendly items here that you don't have to worry about too much into your games. So first we're going to be starting off with the Spell Thief's Edge. This is how you generate gold. If your plants attack champions, you auto-attack champions. Your abilities attack champions, or you auto-hit turrets, you generate gold. Super good. It's got AP and mana regeneration. I always advise people to try and lean into buying boots, the full boots upgrade first, because movement speed is invaluable. So Sorcerer's Shoes ideally is what you're building, but if you can only buy components while leading up to Sorcerer's Shoes, you should be buying control wards. And having like 1-2 health potions in your inventory is fine, or picking up a refillable. So we're just building our way up into the sorcerers. Now we're going to be doing Liandry's. I want you to just take Liandry's every single game. If you're more than welcome to change it up slightly afterwards, after you got more time on Zyra. Maybe you want to try out Eludens, but Liandry's is really good on her, and it procs off the plants that we were talking about earlier. Now you have 2 options, or maybe 3 options after this. These are good suggested items actually here for Zyra. So Zhonya's is a really nice defensive item. It makes you go stasis and can help you prevent being ganked by an assassin. So if you don't know how it works, if you press the Zhonya's button, you go golden and nobody can target you for a brief period of time. So that can help you disengage. So say for example you've got a 1v1 situation and you've got plants going and you've got your abilities down, you've used your ulti, then you can stasis. These plants will still be attacking the target, but they won't be able to attack you. So your plants can essentially help finish the job as well while you're safe. Really solid option against you know, really like assassin heavy compositions, or if there's one really fed assassin on the enemy team. Otherwise, you've got the the max damage output Zyra build, which is a demonic embrace with a Liandry's. They work in sync with each other. They do a lot of damage combined, a lot of max health damage, and does a lot of damage to the tanks. If you do find yourself up against a lot of healing, Zyra, once again, with that Leandries, can apply grievous wounds onto the enemy really easily, which reduces the amount of healing that they receive. So Morello is a really solid option for that too. So it will always be Leandries plus one of those 3 items that I mentioned. And then you then decide from there what else you want. Do you want more protection? Yeah, Zhonya's. Do you want more damage output? Go Demonic. Do you need more anti-heal because you didn't pick it up on your second item? Go Morello. Do you want utility, which we didn't mention? Actually, Rise is also a decent option if you are looking to kite, as in to prevent the enemy team from coming towards you. The slow from that 30% for 1 second. Because you have Leandries on them, it will last a little bit longer. So that kite potential, it is there and added there. You've also got another option here as well, which you have Void Staff. So for example, if you did go the ultra, Leandries into Demonic Embrace setup, Void Staff is a really good option to help deal with tanks and their magic resistance, because it's no good if you've got Leandries and Demonic Embrace if the enemy has a couple of tanks or one tank that has 300 magic resistance, and you have like no way of dealing with him. Then Void Staff is going to help a massive amount in terms of doing damage to that target. So don't underestimate the value of Void Staff. And if you are going up against multiple tanks, you could pick that up second and then go into like a Demonic Embrace or whatever you want to in that regard. I wouldn't really ever look at items such as Rabadons or Shadow Flame. I think Shadow Flame overall is a decent-ish option. But with what those other items that I mentioned give you in terms of either utility or interactions really nicely with your plants, like the Demonic Embrace, I think those items have it slightly over Shadow Flame. But Shadow Flame is still a nice option overall, but I wouldn't put it over what I mentioned earlier. And Rabadons is generally just way too expensive, and you really need the utility still, as you are still a support. Even though you are playing an AP mage, you still have access to those extra supportive type stuff as well, such as anti-tank killing, applying grievous wounds onto the enemy team, or just being extra pesky and annoying for assassins with your Zhonyas. So yeah, just to show that the Leandries and the Demonic Embrace apply to the plants, we'll just do that. And as you can see, the burn effect on the top left hand corner, very small icons there, both for Leandries and Demonic Embrace, ticking away, doing a lot of max health damage. And if those plants are left alive in those fights, and if you ult them as well, increase their HP, they can survive a little bit longer as well. So these plants will overall be doing a lot of DPS. Even if you just with the Leandries and or the Demonic Embrace, just one plant hitting on the target, and then if the plant dies, that it's at least applied the plant auto attack, and then you've got the Arcane Comet and then the Leandries debuff itself on the target. It's going to do a lot of damage to, honestly, a lot of targets anyway. So leading up to a team fight, some good old Q into W poke is really nice, like you were doing in the laning phase, just to help set up the health bars of the enemy players. Because even if you take them only down like 10-20% health before they engage, that can make all the difference in turning a team fight. Because how many times have you seen an enemy get away on 10-15% HP? Well, making sure that you do that poke beforehand can make all the difference. Well, I hope this guide kind of helps you out, and if you are new here, then please subscribe. There's one tip that I just remembered, which I'll just talk about very quickly then. There is another little plant tip. I knew there was something but I had forgot. So one of the really cool things about Zyra is that she's a really good jungler essentially as well, because of how the plants work. So dragons are kind of cool for Zyra to tank. So if I put a seed either side to show this off. A brief overview on dragons, some random dragon knowledge I'm going to throw at you. So Ocean Drake and Cloud Drake do single target attacks, and the Mountain Drake, the Infernal Drake, and the other drakes, the Tech Drakes, trying to think of the name, not the Chem one, but the Hex Drake, sorry, they do AoE damage as well. So the AoE ones are kind of annoying, you need to be paying attention to. So for example here, I'm going to show you these two plants. So each plant can tank 1 auto hit from a dragon, as you can see there. So that was really nice in terms of being able to, for the plants to tank the objective. The Cloud Drake has the fastest auto attack speed, so imagine this was a Cloud Drake. Exact same thing, but your plants will be dying a lot quicker, because the auto attack speed of the dragon is way quicker as well. Like my plants would have died now already, for example. If we were to, against those AoE dragons, stack up plants in front of the dragon like this, that would be a big no-no, because that would do the same amount of damage, but right in front of the dragon. So it'd AoE, area of effect, cleave your plants down. So always, just a thumb of rule, a good thumb of rule is just have your plants, if you've got more than one seed banked up, just have them spread out either side of the dragon. That way you never have to worry about the AoE cleave. And also very, very early on, when you're pulling for your jungler, essentially level 1, make sure you're standing around the objective early on, and then your seeds from your passive will spawn out, just to help set up and tank, like the red buff for example here, for your jungler. So it means that they take less damage. Your plants can actually tank this red buff for longer, so it can take 4 auto hits. I think we just got our red buff. Very cool. That actually is a slight warning though. When you do pull for your jungler, try not to, like, I would say no more than 3 plants on the objective, and don't do too many auto hits, because you could end up into a situation where your plants could, in theory, steal a red buff or an enemy blue buff. So don't go too crazy in the damage. They'd be grateful enough that you have plants essentially tanking the objective for them, so that does help jungle clear quite a bit. And one other thing in regarding seeds on Zyra, her passive does not work when you are in a brush, because it would effectively reveal your position to the enemy, because they would see where the seeds were coming out. But as soon as I step out the brush, if you look at my passive counter on the bottom left hand corner, as soon as I step out the brush, the seeds will then spawn. So if I go back into the brush, it won't spawn, but if I step out of the brush, the seeds should spawn. There we go. So that is how Zyra's passive works. So they won't spawn if you're in a brush. So if you are in lane, for example, you're in the bot lane and you're hiding in the brush, make sure you pop out until your seeds have come out of you with your passive, and then go back and hide in the brush. Otherwise, you're stopping potential plant spawn locations for you to help in the DPS and the damage in the fight to ensue eventually. But as I mentioned, we do lots of support guides here. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I stream on twitch.tv/Bizzleberry. If you want to ask me any questions, feel free to leave anything in the comment section down below, or ask me on stream. I stream at the moment Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays. All the best, take care, and if you are interested in those private coaching sessions or on-stream coaching sessions, then there will be a link underneath. And next week we will be doing another guide, as well as there is a patch delay from Riot, so more support guides to come soon.